Hi there, civic students. I am here with another video, and in this video, we're going to be talking about communism. Now, the first part of this video, I'm going to be going over numbers 11 through 15 in your class notes. So starting with number 11, another form of government is communism. So there we go, there's communism. The idea behind this form of government is so that everyone owns everything and everyone shares in the creation of wealth. Communism is a more extreme version of socialism. So everyone shares in the wealth. Now I'm going to be kind of going a little bit faster than I normally would in class. So if you need to pause this video to write in your answers, please feel free to go ahead and do so. Now, communism is a philosophical, social, political, and economic ideology. The goal of communism is to replace private ownership with communal ownership or control. Communism is based on the teachings of Karl Marx with the adaptations of Vladimir Lenin. So I believe those are some of the things that we started talking about in class before we had to end. And my plan was to expound on those a little bit more. So now there is not going to be necessarily anything that you're going to have to fill in on your worksheets, but I'm just going to give you a little bit more insight as to what communism is actually all about. So the political and economic doctrine of communism is that it wants to replace private property ownership and a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of the means of production, which is everything that the country produces, and the natural resources of the society. So whereas in socialism, the state controls everything, the idea behind communism when it was originally intended was that it would be spread out among the community so that the community as a whole would be in control of everything. So communism is a form of socialism, which we just discussed, but it is a higher and more advanced form. The way that it differs is sometimes a matter of debate depending on the opinions and the ideologies of those who are debating. But the distinction between the two primarily rests upon whether or not the communists are in a revolutionary form of socialism or if they just want to stay socialist. So for instance, Karl Marx used the terms communism and socialism interchangeably. His primary goal was to overthrow capitalism worldwide. He identified two phases of communism that he predicted could overthrow capitalism all over the world. So now the first phase of communism would be a transitional system in which the working class would control the government and economy, yet still find it necessary to pay people according to how long, how hard, and how well they worked. So the first phase was still a merit-based system. So if you were a good worker, a hard worker, if you produced a lot, you would be compensated based on how hard and how long that you worked. And so sometimes that seems kind of fair, that if you're a good worker, you should get paid more than somebody else who doesn't work as much. But then the next phase of communism, which kind of is primarily the ultimate goal of communism, would be that the society would be without class divisions or a government. And in that society, the production and distribution of goods would be based upon the principle from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So in that system, it would be more need-based. So wouldn't matter how much you did, how much you gave, how hard you worked. It would just be based on what you needed. And obviously, there has to be somebody who's making the decision on what you need. So there is no individualism involved in that. And it didn't matter how hard you worked. You could maybe not work as hard as your neighbor, but if your needs were greater, you would still get more anyway. So the followers of Marx, especially during the Russian Revolutionary period, which Vladimir Lenin was a part of, they focused on this distinction of communism, to where they wanted to focus on basically everybody getting what they needed, not necessarily what they earned or what they deserved. So Lenin's assertion was that socialism corresponded to Marx's first phase of communism, and that the second phase of communism was true communism. So when Marx rolled out his two phases, the first phase they deemed as socialism, and then the second phase they deemed as true communism. So Lenin and the Bolshevik wing of the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, so this was a political party during that era, they reinforced the distinction in 1918 after they seized power in Russia by taking on the All-Russian Communist Party. So they seized control of the Communist Party, and this is where they put in that type of regime. So, and since then, communism has been largely, if not exclusively, identified with the form of political and economic organization that was developed in the Soviet Union. And it has been adopted also by the People's Republic of China and other countries that were ruled by communist parties. So there was, after Russia became the premier leader in communism, other political parties in other countries also took on this form of government. They felt that this was the best way to manage not only their government, but their way of life and their economic system. So for much of the 20th century, about 1/3 of the world's population lived under a communist regime. Now, these regimes were characterized by the rule of a single party, and they tolerated no opposition or any dissent among them. So unlike a capitalist economy in which individuals compete for profits and the party leaders in these communist countries establish a command economy, and this is where the state controlled all of the property, and all of the leaders determined what the wages were, the prices, and the production goals. It eventually proved out to be very inefficient, and the inefficiency of these economies played a large part in the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. The remaining communist countries, with the exception of North Korea, now allow greater economic competition. However, politically speaking, they still hold on to a one-party rule. So because the communist way of doing things proved not to work out so well for them economically, they did allow for some competition. However, they didn't want to give up the power, the political power. So, for instance, still over in the Soviet Union, it is still a one-party rule. And the differences between capitalism and socialism and communism, primarily the battle between capitalism and communism, is what led to something called the Cold War. And I'm going to make a separate video now discussing the Cold War, so that I make sure that everything in this video gets to be uploaded properly. So hang on and go to the next video for the Cold War discussions. We'll see you in a few minutes.